Okay, in this video, we're going to use resequencing to create variety in our music. So we're going to start with these files, and these are from the Wwise 201 series. You can download them from the website. And there are these 6 files. And we'll look at the file names briefly. So Explore is the name of the area of the game. Arpeggio, bridge, piano, a brief description of the musical elements within the file, 138 BPM. So we have the beats per minute, the tempo, and here is the meter. We're in 4/4, and this has a length of 16 measures and a pre-roll of 1 measure, and that'll make more sense once we look at it. So it's interesting to note, look how these files are all somewhat similar. They're all the same tempo, but this one actually has a different meter. So we'll have to treat this one slightly differently. So unlike some of the other examples, each file is a full musical statement. So we're not layering these on top of each other. We're playing them back to back in a sequence playlist type fashion. And so we'll be creating our variety by alternating the order in which these play. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is open up our Wwise session, and I have a new session. I'm going to create a music work unit, and we're going to name it music. These audio files we're actually going to drag directly into that work unit, and so they're going to be imported as music segments, which is what we want. And a music segment, if we open this, can contain a single WAV file or can contain multiple WAV files, as we saw in our other layering example. So in this example, since each WAV file is kind of a full musical statement, we only need 1 WAV file per music segment. And while some of these elements are available on the WAV file level, things like tempo and the meter are not available. So first thing we're going to do is actually set our tempo. We know that we're at 138 because that's what our file says. So we're going to click in here, set that to 138. And we're going to click on our WAV file then. And down here in the music segment area, we can see our WAV file represented on the grid, just like in a DAW. And so if we go back up, we back up here, and let's say we're still at 120, the default. You see our grid doesn't quite line up to to the music. So if we were going to place markers in, we wouldn't be able to snap to the grid. So very inefficient way to work. So that's why we first thing you want to do is establish the tempo and get that in there. So whatever work we're doing is snapping to the grid. And of course we can snap to the grid by enabling the snap to. And just in case your grid isn't showing bars and beats, if you right click up here, you can choose between seconds and bars and beats. So we do on bars and beats, so we're good there. And next we want to set our beginning point for this musical element. So if we listen to it, we would have heard that there's a beginning kind of ramp up to this piece. And the same thing with the end. We can see that kind of once the musical elements stop, there's a long fade out. And so we're going to use these entrances and exits to smoothly move between musical segments. And that'll become more obvious once we get into this. So the first thing we want to do is set our entry and exit points. So I'm going to collapse this a little bit. And you can use this shortcut with your keyboard or the scroll wheel on your mouse, or you can click the plus minus down here, just so they're all showing. So this is our entry cue, and we want to move this to where the music actually kind of starts, the meat of the music. So the best way to do that is to kind of mark it with your cursor, because once we start moving this entry cue, things kind of start shifting around. So put our cursor right on the second bar. And if you click on the entry cue and then hit Control, now we can move our entry cue and you can see all our measure numbers shift over, but our wave file stays intact. So just kind of show you, in this instance, the musical ID is actually starting on measure 2, where the lead in is starting at measure 1. So once we move our entry cue, now we can see that the musical element is starting on measure 1, and then our intro starts in this negative space, which is what we want. So that's good. So our entry cue is on 1, and our exit cue is on 17 because it's a 16 measure phrase. So that's perfect. So now that we have that one done, we really need to go and apply the tempo to the rest of the music segments in order for our grid to line up. I don't really want to do that right now because it's kind of a waste in this case, because if we just create a parent element, which we're going to anyway, we can assign the tempo to that parent element and it'll take care of all these individual entries, because information like tempo and meter, it's set by the parent element and overrides anything that comes below it, unless you specifically say override parent. So with that being said, I'm going to select all of our music segments and then right click and say new parent, and we're going for the music playlist container. So now we have that. We'll type explore. So that is now our parent playlist container to all of our music segments. And so now, once we set this to 138, it's going to override all of these. Actually, it already did override it. We just set it to the correct tempo. So I can see all this information is grayed out. So even though we have the correct information set here, it's grayed out because it's being overridden by the parent. So now we don't have to set each one of these individually. It's a little better way to go. And this is a good example of how to override it. So the tempo is the same as these other ones, but the meter is different. So this one we are going to override. And because we're overriding it, we have to put in all the information. We can't kind of pick and choose. So we'll put in our tempo, and then we'll say our meter is 3/4. And so that is good for now. So I'll go back up here. Now we'll finish putting in our end cues, beginning cues and end cues. So that entry cue is good because there's no intro. This one's a little different. This is a 17 measure phrase, so that's okay. So this goes in measure 18. This one as well has no intro. So we will just set the exit cue right at measure 17. This one does have an intro, so we're going to put our cursor right at bar 2, and we can see we have a little, this is the rhythm one, so we just have a little percussion lead in here. So now we can control, drag our entry cue to that cursor. That looks good. And now our exit cue on 17 looks good. Explores theme, same here. I'm going to put our cursor at 2, just so make sure we're lining it up correctly. And our entry cue or exit cue at 17. And lastly, our 3/4 measure. And this looks a little different because it isn't 3/4. So, but still, we want to start at this 2. It's a little confusing because these 2s and the beat numbers and measure numbers are roughly the same size. So it actually looks a little confusing. These are beats 1, 2, 3, measure 2, beats 1, 2, 3, measure 3. So you can tell it's a measure because it has the thicker line here. So we'll put that cursor there because that's the first beat, and drag our cursor there, our entry cue there. And so I guess our entry's right around 5, right? We look at here. This is a 3 measure phrase, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, length 3 measures. So yeah, I guess this is just a big long tail. I don't really see any transients in here. So yeah, that's just a tail that lasts for the last 3 measures. Okay, so we are done setting those up. One thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this down just a little bit because I know the way I'm recording here, the microphone volume is much quieter compared to the system volume where the music plays. So if I turn it down, I have a fighting chance of them being a little bit more even. So just like a playlist up here, when we're dealing with sound effects, we need to create our playlist here. You can see we have our contents in this tab down here and our playlist. And slightly different than playlists up here, but we still have to add elements. So we're going to start by adding our arpeggio track. So that's the very first track. So this is kind of like the entry track to this whole sequence. And so when we play this, yeah, this has all the information. This should play. We haven't set our looping yet. So when we do play it, it'll play once and then it'll just continue and not loop. So in order to make it loop, we need to go to this parent, our starting point for the whole process. And we have four options here: sequence, continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. And we'll touch on those. And even if we didn't touch on those, you can always check out the contextual help menu down here. It's very good at kind of, telling you, roughly what all the elements are. So, but I am going to tell you first that this won't loop until we set the looping on this kind of parent group here. So even though if we look at our music segment and we have our end cue and entry cue and end cue set up, it still won't actually loop until we do it from this parent element. And the way we do that is to go to this loop count and we say infinite. So any elements we add to this playlist is going to play them however we define them, and then it'll go back to the top and keep looping. If we did not do that, left it at 1, it would play it basically once, then stop, and you can set a play count here. But because whatever we put in here, we want it to infinitely loop, we set that to infinite. And so now if we hit play, okay, and that is 16 measures long, so you just have to trust me that loops. It can take a long time to kind of test the variations because each element is like 16 measures. So we'll keep it like this for now, but in a minute we're going to kind of shorten these so it's easier to kind of just run through the progressions. So the next thing we're going to do is add another group. So basically a group is another kind of section of the playlist where you can define how it's going to play. So this first one is a sequence, so it's going to kind of play from top to bottom. But if we add a new group, and we can see that this group is a child element of this. So we can make this, and I want to do this random, this next one. So we will say, well, it doesn't matter because I'm only going to add one element for now just to kind of show what's happening. So when there's only one element, the options don't actually matter because it plays the same either way. So I'm going to go over here. I want to pick something with an entry, an intro, and exit material. So again, this has no intro material. So I want to pick this one with a intro. So there's one measure of intro leading in and 2 measures leading out. And this one has 1 measure leading in and 2 measures leading out. So go back up here to explore, and I'm going to drag this rhythm. So when I hit play, because of how we've defined this, it's going to start here, play this first one, and it's going to play the entry measure plus the 16 measures, so technically 17 measures. And then it's going to next come down to this next group. And we're going to put more in this group eventually. But for now, there's just one element. So when it hits this next group, we want to check out how the 2 music segments overlap. And we'll look a little closer at that. The first thing to note is that when we hit play, there's a yellow arrow that shows which track is actually playing. So we'll look at that now. Once we hit, so we'll just hit play and let the 16 measures go and let it get to the next group. Okay, so the interesting thing there was if the yellow arrow is showing us what's playing, at some point there were two things playing at the same time. And generally when you're playing music, if you're playing two things at the same time, that can be bad a lot of the times. But the reason this works is because Wwise is smart enough to know when the playhead gets to 16 here, it knows it's going to the next track. It's looking ahead. And it's looking at the rhythm track saying, oh, we have a measure of lead in. So I can't start this measure. I can't start this segment right on the downbeat. So it's starting this segment right here. And so that's why we saw two arrows as the playhead is moving, because there's two tracks playing. And then at this point, the rhythm track is actually fully engaged in playing, how we would expect. But now the tail of the arpeggio is playing for two more measures. And so these tracks are dovetailing, overlapping each other, and that makes for the smooth transition into one another. If we took these and we just like chopped the endings and the intros for all of them, depending on the material, sometimes it might be okay, but good chance it would be much choppier because we don't have these elements kind of fading in, fading out as the next elements are fading in. So if we look at that visually, this is an image from the Wwise site. So you can see we were playing the intro. This was the intro we were playing. And here it already knew that Explore Rhythm was the next track coming up. And so it knew that Explore track had a measure lead in time. So at this point, it fired off Explore Rhythm. And so we had two yellow arrows at the same time. So it's playing this, two yellow arrows. As this is tailing out, two yellow arrows. At the point we hit measure 3, we went back to one yellow arrow. And so then only one element was playing. And you can see how this just kind of continues. So that is how these tracks dovetail into each other and make for smooth transitions. So no matter what you're going into and out of, if you've kind of planned these pre-roll and post-roll elements, hopefully in the end there's a nice smooth transitions between all the tracks. So now all that being said, these are all 16 measure phrases, and it's actually really hard to kind of demonstrate the different playlists when we have to sit around for 16 measures. So I'm going to completely go into each one of these and just make them short. So each one's going to basically play for 4 measures, and it will not sound good, but visually you will see how these playlists move around. We will get the point across. And the reason I'm moving the NQ as well as the wave file, if I had left this wave file here, our NQ, we'd still switch music quickly, but then this whole end tail would be playing while the next thing's playing. And pretty sure that is not what the composer had in mind when he was creating these tracks. So don't want to blow up his work too much. Transition to bridge. This one we're not going to hear too much, so I'm going to leave that as is. That's the bridge. Yeah, I'll make the bridge a little longer because the thing I'm going to do, we're not going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's just make it 8. So we're not going to hear this one too much for this example. So that looks good. So now these are all much shorter. So we have the rhythm in there. I want the piano. Oops. To explore with the piano and the theme. And so now we can kind of go through the different variations here. So sequence continuous plays all music options in the group in sequential order each time the group is played. So these would play in order. And, if we wanted an argument to be made, why don't we just bake that into the WAV file? Valid argument, but we do have some options over here where we can affect the loop count. So maybe these could actually loop, multiple times, or we could set the loops to random, where maybe they don't loop, maybe they loop a couple times. So even though they're doing it in a sequence, there is some variety we can introduce over here. So sequence continuous, sequence step. Plays only one music object in the group. Each time the group is played, the next time the group is played, the next music object in the group is played. So in this case, since we have these two groups, we're going to enter here. It would play this. It would play this, and it would only play one element, this first element. And then we're going to go back to here. And then the next time it would play the second element, then go back to here. Next time play the third element, then go back to here. So that's the big loop. And then random continuous plays all music objects in the group, one after the other in random order, each time the group is played. So you see now that we have random selected, we have wait, meaning we can choose, we can, wait one versus the other. So random continuous is when we enter, we play this first one, and then it's going to play all three, but it's going to, pick one, then pick another one, then pick another one. But it'll pick, randomly between the three before it goes back to the beginning. And then random step is it will play the beginning, and then it will just play a single one, and then go back to the beginning, and then randomly play another one, then go back to the beginning, and randomly play another one. We can define the wait over here, and again, the looping, we can define how many times it loops once it does play. So just more ways to add variety here. So now that these are all basically 4 measures, we can hit play on Explore and see what that, it might not sound so good, but we can see what it looks like anyway with our yellow line. So let's look at theme. I didn't realize that we didn't cut theme very short. That's why I went so long. Oh, 1, 2, 3. Okay, whatever. So, but these other ones you might notice like, I still saw 2 arrows going, but we cut the ends off. There's no exit material while there's 2 arrows going. And the reason there's 2 arrows going is because we never got rid of this entry material for arpeggio. So when we're seeing the 2 arrows, meaning two music segments are playing at the same time, is because this first measure is still being honored. So that we saw the 2 arrows for this entrance measure going back to arpeggio. So that's random step. And if we go to random continuous, we can see it plays this one and then would play all 3. So the interesting thing to note there is that you can see it played, it didn't just play 3 of them and then go back, because it's truly random, and random means you can hear the same thing 3 times in a row. But because it's random continuous, it still has to play all 3. So if it plays this one, and then this one, and then this one, and then this one, it still can't go back because it hasn't played that 3rd one yet. So it didn't exit this loop until it finally played that last one, and then it went back to the top. So, it's just all different interesting variations. And you can set the random type over here. So if I hit shuffle, it actually would just play the 3 and then go back to the top. All right, so that makes sense. So this last little bit, this is really most of everything from that lesson. We're going to add one more group. we're going to make it a random step. So we haven't heard our bridge yet. So in this example, we're going to put the bridge here. So what we have here, it's going to do the same thing we did last time, but when it's done playing these three, because it only has one element, it would play this bridge. So the next thing I want to do is add one more group underneath this and make this sequence continuous, meaning as soon as it hits this, it's going to play whatever's in here in a row. So I'm going to do the transition to bridge and then the bridge. And if you recall, bridge, I don't think we messed with it a little. But the transition, we did not mess with. We kept that full because that's we haven't heard that too much yet. Okay, so for this part I just added, once it hits this random step, these two child elements are both valid candidates for random step. So it'll either play the bridge and then move on to the next thing, or it'll play the sequence continuous and then play the transition to bridge and then the bridge, and then move back to the top. So once it gets to this part. Before we had 3 possible entries. By adding this group is the 4th possible entry. And so if we play this arpeggio and then we play this random step here, it's going to go back to the top because these are all random steps. So it'll play this, it'll choose this one, go back to the top, play this, choose one of the 4, which is this one, go back to the top, play this, choose one of the 4. Oh, finally we're here. Now that we're in this random step, it'll choose to either play this one or these 2 and then go back to the top. So that's kind of the chance elements we're dealing with here. Yeah, so, you notice we didn't get to this bridge very much because we had this random step here, and it was only choosing one of the 4. So we're actually getting this bridge very little. So it really depends on what you want to hear. You have to experiment, play with the different parameters. So if we wanted to hear this bridge, every time, then we could select one of the continuous ones, and, we'd be sure to hear it at least once before it circled back to the top. So so that's interesting stuff, how this all comes together. It's fun to just put it together and just discover all the randomness that you can introduce to all these things. So hope that was helpful.